Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Dore, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends. So today I want to introduce you to Canned Wine Co. If you don't know about them already, the reason why I'm such a fan of these wines is that unlike many canned wine options, they prioritize quality over volume, focusing on sourcing premium single-varietal wines from top vineyards around Europe. And a few weeks ago, I had the incredible opportunity to visit the beautiful Loire Valley and taste some amazing Gamay grapes from a very talented winemaker called Lionel Gosseaume. And I was absolutely blown away. I was tasting his premium Gamay first from the bottle, then from the can. Both of them were served in a glass, and the absolute best part of it was nearly impossible to tell them apart. I took part in the harvest. I witnessed firsthand the care and passion that goes into every grape. And what I learned, I want you guys to learn too. And so there is no one better to tell the story and explain some more of the more technical parts to quality wine canning than Ben Franks, the co-founder of this awesome, sustainable company. But before we go to the chat, I'd like to thank Coravan, who are the sponsor of this episode. And I want to stick with a sustainability theme here. Did you know that Coravan has just released a limited edition to its timeless range called Forest Green? And it's more than just a beautiful device. It is a pledge to a more sustainable future. So for every Forest Green timeless 6+ system, sorry, lots of words, everyone that's sold on Coravan's website during the festive season, so it is ready to go now, they will be planting a tree in partnership with One Tree Planted. So their goal is to plant 15,000 trees worldwide. This is part of Coravan's ongoing commitment, not only to enhance the wine experience, but to make a real difference in reducing their global carbon footprint too. So a reminder of what the timeless preservation system is. It lets you pour, savor, and explore wine without even removing the cork, perfectly preserving the wine left in the bottle for weeks, months, or even years. And now comes in this beautiful color green. But more than a color, it's a symbol of their dedication to preserving the world we love. So do go over to Coravan's website to check this out for yourself. But now, for all of you canned wine lovers, let's go to the chat with Ben. I need to know, was there a specific wine that brought you into the industry? Did you have the wine moment?
That's a difficult question. I think I had wine moments that weren't necessarily around a single wine. So I really enjoyed wine, but didn't really know much about it when I had my first wine job, if you like, which was part-time at Waitrose as a student. And I really wanted to be a journalist. And I had a great writer friend of mine say, well, if you're a great writer, you can write about anything. But if you're a good writer, you should specialize. So I picked wine, being on the wine department, and managed to convince my manager there at the time to give me a bottle of wine a week for £10. And I would write a review about it for this magazine that I ran, which is a whole other story, and the internal Waitrose mag. And I got a little bit of practice tasting lots of wines. And my first real journalism gig was to go down to Camel Valley and meet Sam Lindo in Cornwall to interview him. And I went down on the train, hopped on the bus into the village in the middle of nowhere and trekked across a farm in my suit and got mud up my trousers, knocked on his door and said, "Hello, Sam, I don't know anything about wine, but I have to write this piece on you and I'd love to learn more." And, he could have told me to get lost, but instead he spent 3 hours with me on the balcony in January. So I was looking at this valley of twigs, if you like, but it still looked beautiful.
Still beautiful.
Exactly. Still beautiful. We tasted all of his wines, which is brilliant as a student, sitting there tasting all these wines for free.
Free wine.
And asking the owner, all the questions you ask as a newbie with wine. And then he took me around the winery there and showed me how wine is made. And that was the moment where I walked away and went, I want to get into the wine trade. But I think there's then another wine, Cabernet Sauvignon from St. Illa, that Waitrose used to stock, that was a Bulgarian 899 red that I put on tastings as a freelancer that people loved. And that was the kind of seed for novel wines, which I then went on to do for 10 years. And then the earliest possible memory I have of wine was sipping Jacob's Creek and pretending I liked it just to be part of the family dinner table, but pretty much sure didn't like it at all. But so there are several wine moments, but I think the point where I became a wine person was probably that day with Sam at Camel Valley.
And hang on a minute, just because everyone's going, this wine magazine, but that's another story. Well, I mean, can we still find your wine magazine? Is it somewhere?
No, it doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But when I was 16, I wrote a
Fortunately.
letter. Yeah. I wrote a letter to the Salisbury Journal where I grew up, and I said, can I write for you? I'm an aspiring writer, etc. And the publisher actually replied to say no, they have plenty of writers. So I set up a student magazine called Pie Magazine because I liked eating pie, so I called it Pie. And it was a magazine about anything and everything, but was supposed to give you the experience you needed to be a journalist by doing it yourself. So I got lots of writers to write for that. And in 2014, at its height when I was at uni, it had about 100 writers from all around the world, about 100,000 readers, but I never monetized it, which was a shame, but never mind. But I learned how to edit and pull stuff and write about lots of different things. And then that was the magazine that gave me the leverage in the Waitrose meeting to go, well, I'll publish it on here if you give me a bottle of wine a week. And I actually got a bit cheeky with that and started wanting to try £20, £30 wine. So I said to my manager, if I skip a week, can I save up the credit and get a posher wine? And he very kindly said yes. And, so I tried lots of different wines in that last year of university and did my WSETs and met Sam. And that was all kind of a culmination of the beginning of my wine journey, if you like.
I love this. So what we've learned is if you don't ask, you don't get. And equally, each step you take, put in the work because it can lead to something else. And so actually as well, you mentioned, because people are going to go, what's novel wines? You were loving this Bulgarian wine. And of course, Eastern European wines. There's so many phenomenal value wines there now, which are there to explore. And that was kind of why you set up Novel Wines, right? To bring in these slightly lesser known country wines, I suppose, just as an overall picture, right?
Yeah. So this was 2015 into 16. It was a mix of Eastern Europe, particularly, but then also English wines. Believe it or not, you're in the English wine trade, but believe it or not, there weren't many writers for English wine in 2015. So I was getting quite a lot of journo gigs as an English wine writer, which was quite fun for UK Vine magazine and stuff like that. And I wanted to set up a business that did the wines that weren't in the supermarkets that you couldn't find, but only did it. So the concept of Novel Wines was the majestic for weird wine, was kind of the catchphrase that we had at the beginning. And my business partner, Georgie, is Hungarian, and I loved the Tokaj wines. I got a sweet tooth, so Tokaj was stunning. And I basically lived off hen parties in my early freelance days because they were steady work in Bath. You did a lot of wine tastings for hen dues. And I always finished on this dessert wine called Kardosh Tundemersha, which means fairy tale. It's a very lightly sweet late harvest wine named after the winemaker's daughter. A beautiful story you can tell. And they always tasted that wine and I went, what's your favorite wine of the tasting? And it was 9 times out of 10, fairy tale. So that was the first wine on our list. And the second wine was a Japanese wine from Ayana Misawa called Grace Koshu Kayagatake, which was this really light, beautifully fresh, pink berried white wine. Grows in Yamanashi, and it has these little paper hats on it to offset the rain. And just basically it was this love for stories and these wines that weren't getting the attention they deserved in 2016. And we built a list of 90 wines from Central Eastern Europe, Asia, England, all the places you couldn't find anywhere else. And that was the concept of Novel Wines. And it was a bit of a weird business plan because we said, I'll take out a loan, which I did, spent it all in 2 weeks buying the wine in, panicked a little bit, but we had this launch party at the Hilton in Bath. And we said, if we can fill that room with 300 people, we're on to something. So we did that successfully. 300 people paid to come taste the first wines we brought in. Luckily, we sold enough of them to keep going. And then it kind of snowballed into full-on business that went on to win a few decanter awards and things like that.
Yes, it did. But then the journey continues because quite clearly, Ben, you're very hungry onto the next business that you could create. So then what made you go, do you know what? Now I want to can premium wines.
Yeah, this was interesting. I met a chap called Simon Rollings, who's my business partner at Camel Valley, and he came to one of my tastings, a chocolate and wine tasting with his wife Lisa, and they really enjoyed the tasting, and he wanted to set up a startup in something. He loved food and wine, and he did a bit of work for Novel because he has a background in HelloFresh and things like that, and I wanted to build a subscription part of Novel Wines. And we talked a lot about what was happening in America with canned wine and this premium single serve option that seemed to be booming out of California. We've realized in hindsight the growth is actually, and the appetite for canned wine is actually bigger in the UK and much faster in the UK in terms of adopting it as a format, which is interesting. But it was America that inspired this idea to do premium wine. And both Simon and I had this incredible thing for the wine trade to hear, where we would open a bottle of wine but not necessarily finish it all in a single evening. So we loved trying something new, but it was quite difficult to do that every day if you had to drink an entire bottle. So the real compelling part of Can Wine Co. is a way to have a really good glass of wine for a wine drinker without having to open a bottle. And it was, how do you do the single serve perfectly? And we loved the sustainability story of cans. We loved the fact you could brand the entire can, so cover the whole label, that you could innovate because no one else was doing it. In the UK, there wasn't a premium single serve canned wine, apart from the Uncommon doing English wine. So there's a big gap to showcase some of these amazing wines of Europe and give a wine drinker the opportunity to be curious and play and taste one glass of something. So that was the beginning, really. And then I brought a little bit of novel wines into it by starting with Gruner Veltliner and great varieties like that.
Well, see, I love that. And we will get on to all the different varieties in a second. But I think, you know, when I talk to you about can wine, my God, your knowledge of at the technical side, there's so much more behind it that I think many people don't realize about. So just because we haven't got all day, but for people listening, what has been the most complicated part? What has been the biggest challenge with putting premium wine in a can?
Yeah, the can is a difficult vessel to put anything into because it's
a little harder than a bottle, right?
Yes, yeah. It's completely reductive in the sense that no air gets into the can. So you have to do everything at the beginning with the winery. So all the aging and the kind of working with the wine to get it to a point where it's perfect to drink. Because when it goes into that can, it's basically a snapshot in time, and your job is to make that picture last as long as possible so the customer can drink that perfect point. So when we were learning how to put stuff in the can, the first two wines we did were a Gruner Veltliner not made by Huber. So Huber is our winemaker now and has been since 2020, but the original Gruner was not Huber. The other one was a red wine from Portugal, a Touriga Nacional, and we did no technical assessment at all. And we very quietly withdrew it very quickly and released our actual. So these were the experiment wines, really, the first time we did it. And we had no technical assessment of the wine. We just loved the wines and we put them in the can and we thought, yeah, that would be great. The Touriga Nacional had quite high volatile acidity. So within a month, it was tasting like tyres. It wasn't very nice. And the Gruner Veltliner went in quite reductive, basically. So it had reductivity and bit closed and didn't perform very well. So we then said, well, what if we're going to do this properly? There's no point putting an amazing glass of wine into a can if you don't have that experience of that amazing glass of wine when you open it. So we worked with Jennifer Bond, a technical manager who's kind of the guru of packaging in alt formats on a quality control level. She audits sites for BRC accreditations and things like that and has really good knowledge of doing things properly to get the right result in the can. And it was still quite new, and Australia was doing lots of studies and things. But we learned that the sulfur levels needed to be low because trapping sulfur in a reductive environment is a bad idea. We needed low copper because the copper level breaks down the hair width liner that sits between the wine and the aluminium can itself and protects the wine. we needed to have the right pH and all this sort of stuff. So there's all these little points of a wine that you need to hit. And we drew this spec, if you like, of where a wine needs to be. And then we also found out there were certain grapes that didn't work, like Sauvignon Blanc, which has a high files content that broke down the liner faster. And there was a 1 in 9 failure rate of Sauvignon Blanc in can. And we said, oh, ouch, that's not good. That's shocking. Yeah. So we said, what tastes like Sauvignon, but does what we want to do, which is an interesting alternative for wine drinkers, but has that Sauvignon crisp, fresh, bright, zesty thing. And that's where we landed on Gruner, because it has that with this deeper peach character and this spice that makes it really interesting. So we learned a lot very quickly before we launched our originals, which were the Gruner, the Grenache Rosé, and the Old Vine Garnacha, made by Marcus Huber, Thierry Boudinard, and the master of wine, Noel Robertson.
Amazing. And you were telling me, just going on the pH, that literally there's a tiny, tiny limit that a wine needs to be between this pH and that pH. And if it's on either side, not going to work, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a very small gap. But I like to push our technical manager quite a lot. So we're one of the only, I'm pretty sure we are the only company dedicated to cans with a technical manager QC. And basically we're looking, I as a buyer have a passion for something, and you'll hear when we talk about the grapes, I bought a lot of them in as passion projects, but there's always this kind of lovely tension that happens between me saying something is perfect for the market, innovative and passion, with that very sensible technical side going, well, actually, this is what works. And sometimes we have to play and try and make something work. But the one thing we don't do is shortcuts. So, we're talking about Sauvignon Blanc. We have recognized that Sauvignon is this great selling grape variety, and there is premium Sauvignon we'd love to can one day. But instead of just going and doing that, we're looking at a 3-year research project to justify Sauvignon in can and make a Sauvignon that works in can with the winemaker before we even attempt to go for it. So there's these slim things like pH, but we're always looking to stretch it and work out the ways we can offset X risk to create Y reward or whatever it might be.
Yes, no, it's amazing. And I mean, I suppose for people listening going, well, how are you going to research this Sauvignon Blanc? Would I be right in saying you basically need to bring down, well, not bring down, it's almost bring up the pH, so slightly less acidity, meaning ripen it more. So you've got to keep it on the vine for longer, and then taking out some of these thiols. So these are these aromatic compounds that we know and love. So it's not going to quite be as intense, pungent Marlborough New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc as people expect. How do you make Sauvignon Blanc still taste like Sauvignon Blanc, but somehow slightly make it more restrained? That's kind of where you're going?
Yeah, that's the one avenue we've kind of pictured. Obviously, it might change along the way, but if you've ever had those kind of central Italian Sauvignons that have that little bit more yellow fruit, that softer, more stone tropical note going on, they're beautiful wines and kind of largely undiscovered and not too far away from Sauvignon. I think one thing I've always liked to do as a buyer through Novel Wines and Can Wine Co. is put something on the table that is slightly different. I mean, one of the hardest wines to source was our rosé, our Grenache Rosé, because I wanted the kind of crowd-pleasing elements of Provence, that dry, bright, juicy style, but to bring something in that was a little bit different so that it wasn't like every other wine you had, because you were buying Can Wine Co., not down the line rosé. So we tasted so many wines, and the reason I went with Thierry's wine is because it had this little bit of butterscotch. It had this more ripe citrus that moved it away from kind of lemon and summer berries and into kind of mandarin and oranges and a little bit of grapefruit and that sort of thing. I love the rosés of the Eastern Mediterranean, so Turkey, Cyprus, Greece, those kind of rosé palettes that are more on that melon, softer citrus note. So it was really exciting to find Thierry's wine that had that element going on. And then as a piece of learning, we worked out that was beautiful for the first 12 months, but then into the second 12 months, it started going from hint of butterscotch to more Werther's original note. So we went to Thierry and we blended with him this new version of Grenache Rosé that now tastes beautiful, but then also has 2 years plus in the can. So it's still delicious, even if for some reason you pick it up 2 years later. We hope all our wine gets bought and enjoyed much faster than that.
Just in case one slips down behind the back of the sofa, on a kind of crazy Friday night. You never know.
Very much. I mean, that's one of our big wins, really, is we are market leaders for that time in can, that length in can, and that quality from canning for, 2 years plus. And it's all this constant learning about what's dropping off, what's lasting, how do we make it better, and going back and working with the wineries directly for each vintage for the can itself. And we have our technical manager shelf life testing every single week, which seems mad she puts it all in a graph and we sign off on it, so it's all good.
Listen, she puts it in a graph, it all looks legit, so just let her do. But that's amazing, isn't it? So what you're saying, for everybody listening, you're guaranteeing at least 2 years that wine is still going to be tasting beautiful. You've got your technical manager every week actually checking all of these wines, which means you can only ever get better and evolve and know where you are with things. And then you said to me, which I thought was fascinating, which one of the wines is it that you've been really surprised? Is it like 4 or 5 years is still drinking well?
Yeah, so Noel Robertson's first wine we did with him was the 2016 Old Vine Garnacha. So Old Vine itself has more structure anyway, but then it had gone into oak for a while because the 16 vintage was very hot. So you had to oak it to offset some of the alcohol, add a bit of structure and make it, that really nice drinkable style. And we tasted this wine, I think, in 2019 and went, that's just brilliant. We have to find a way to can this. Everyone wants a light, juicy red. I was looking for a Gamay from day one, which we'll come on to, but we wanted a light, juicy red, but we tried this Old Vine Garnacha and went, you know what, we have to just launch with this because it's brilliant. So this had already had 4 years of aging pretty much by the time we put it into a can in 2020, a bit less than 4 years, but it had lots of oak and it reached this beautiful balance, and we canned it as the first one, and it got critical acclaim. It was the one Jancis Robinson picked out as the best can on the market at the time, and it won us Harrods and all this sort of thing. And then we open it probably every 3-4 months just to see how it's doing. It's now had 4 years plus in the can, and it still tastes amazing. So our technical manager calls it our immortal wine, if you like. But it's proven to us that reds are so much easier to can because they have this structure, they have a bit of micro-oxidation, they're kind of a bit shielded from all the problems you have in a can generally. So we're going to keep tasting that Old Vine Garnacha and see how long it lasts. But so far, it's nearly 8 years old as a wine, and it tastes fantastic in a can. So that's something rare on the market, I think.
I love that, because that alone kind of should hopefully get people listening going, right, if you didn't believe that you can get high quality wine in can, that's a good indicator. So with all of this put together, all of your learnings and your, I guess, internal love for different varieties, how are you choosing the wines that now go into can?
Yeah, it's always taste first. So the Gamay I'll tell you about in a second, but the one I like to use is St. Laurent because it's such an unusual grape variety to have in your range anyway. But in the pandemic, I was judging the Wine Austria Awards and I was doing novel wines and Can Wine Co at this point. So it was part of novel, really. I got delivered a half pallet of 200 full bottles of wine to taste in an afternoon. And Dennis and I, my shop manager at the time, sat in the shop and we tasted through all of them and wrote our spreadsheet notes and rated everything. And you can imagine when you're about 120 wines in, there's not a huge amount you're tasting anymore, especially during the pandemic when you're having a nice glass of wine. About wine 140 something, I come across Walter Glatz's St. Laurent. Now, I like St. Laurent anyway because it's this rustic kind of darker take on Pinot Noir, and I like Pinot, but having that kind of richer but more honest kind of wine was really interesting. And after 140 wines, this wine honestly stood out like a sore thumb. It was delicious, memorable, interesting, but had intensity about it. And I love that balance when you have intense ripe fruit with fresh acidity. So I said to Simon, we should can this wine because it's brilliant. And I actually ended up canning it and bringing it into Can Wine Co before we imported it in bottle a year or two later.
Wow, okay.
Glatzer, being a traditional family vineyard, in Austria, had no idea what cans were, hadn't really done bulk before, and we had to convince him. And that one of the hardest things with can wine is convincing people you're doing it properly. So we sent him the wines we'd already made from Marcus and Tirionol. And we also asked Marcus, who is another Austrian winemaker in Niederösterreich down Traisental way, to ring up Glatzer and explain that we were legitimate and we're not crazy people.
Well, you're a little bit crazy, but the best people are. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this completely uncommercial St. Laurent wine that we brought to market, when we started putting it in front of people and they tasted it, it did the same thing it did to me in that Austrian tasting. It became people's favourites. They were really interested that we're doing so different. And it's hard because it is one of those wines you do need to taste to buy. So it's slower than the other lines, but it was pure passion project. And in a similar way with the two Waitrose lines, Verdeco and Gamay, the original Verdeco was inspired by a tasting I did with Tim Atkin, the master of wine. And I tried the Verdeco Malcorta white wine and loved it so much. I rang the vineyard and said, we really want to can your wine, but I want to oak it. And they said, oh, you can't can the Malcorta because it has to be bottled, but you can the normal Verdeco claim. So we said, okay, great, but can you oak it? So they then went and oaked it for us. We had to wait 3 months. We brought this barrel-aged Verdeco to the market. It still tastes delicious. It's 2019. It's been in can now for 2.5 years, I think. And that's more like whiskey and things now. It's developed really interesting in the can and a bit more love or hate, but I love it. And that was the first Verdeco. When we came to Waitrose, we wanted that similar Sauvignon, not Sauvignon. So we went back to Javier Sands and said, can you do this without oak now? Waitrose is the potential customer. And we ended up making it for Ocado. So we had it in hand and then gave it to Waitrose and got the listing. So that was, again, tasted it, loved it, passion project, experimented and released to market. And then the Gamay was, to not my credit, but Abby, my colleague who's in sales, we were in Vinexpo in Paris. And she knew I'd been looking for a Gamay at this point for 4+ years. She wandered across Lionel Gosseaume and Kathy, who you met, tasted this and said, Ben, you have to come try this wine. So I came and tasted the wine. Interestingly, Lionel was a skeptic because before he thought about it, he was still that, Frenchman of bottled wine, etc. Especially quality, he's, at that time president of Loire, has a reputation to think about, etc. And I'm also going over there I've had so many conversations with terrain winemakers, love their Gamay, but it's too small and I can't work them. Thinking, oh, this is another small family winery that I'm going to love the wine of, but I can't work with because the volumes are too small or whatever it might be. Anyway, sat down with him and I think we both realized in the space of a very passionate conversation that we were doing quality really well and loved wine and wanted to look after the product and the cans looked beautiful, etc. And similarly, he was a innovative, passionate winemaker who wanted to be doing new things, improving new areas of market and growing Loire's reputation beyond, the tradition that it had, which I think is partly because he's a younger winemaker in the sense that he started in 2007, but also just his personality of really wanting to build and do better all the time. In a similar way to us. We couldn't work with him for a while because as passionate as I am still a buyer and I need a place for it to go in the market. And we always have Waitrose, but the conversation with Waitrose took a long time. We were just talking and then I remember video calling Lionel one day and he had our cans on his shelf behind him in the office. And I said, oh, that's really cool because we're not buying your wine yet. Thank you for showing off our cans. And it turns out his son, university, had done a project on our wines in can and written about alt formats. And there was this wonderful moment of that kind of connection and partnership before we'd even really started working together. And I think that lays the foundations for a very strong working relationship when Ocado finally happened and then Waitrose to put the Gamay in and really celebrate that.
I love that. And meeting Lionel myself, apart from that, I felt his passion. He is a winemaker that has family history. You were telling me about the juice that's going in these cans. These are old vines. It's not just vines that were planted a few years ago. How old are the vines of the Gamay that you are canning?
Yeah, they're a mix. I mean, some of them are 40 years old. So they've got this intensity about them that gives you that richness. Because the problem I have with Beaujolais, not that this is always the case, but where you would probably go to find Gamay if you were sensible, they were all quite rich. So the intensity and alcohol was quite high and they were moving into this almost jammy style. That's not the case for all Beaujolais, obviously, but almost all the stuff we were tasting was like that. It's a bit jammy and rich. And obviously in the Loire, traditionally the Gamay is quite light and high acidity and certainly difficult to can because the acids are just too much. And also you have this thing in the UK, I think, where if a wine is light without intensity, people call it thin, and then it gets written off and you don't really make any headway. And we really want to change minds and have something that's largely quite crowd pleasing. So the fruit was really important. And when you have the older vines, that intensity of fruit is balanced with that acidity and freshness. And I think that's why we had to can Lionel's. There was no one really who had hit the brief like he had. And yeah, I think it tastes fantastic.
I found it fascinating as well. As somebody who's been in the wine industry for a while now, yes, 75% or whatever of Gamay grows in Beaujolais. And of course, now it's fun. It's traveling all over the world. But actually, I always thought Touraine as a wine region, which I think Touraine is the largest of the 4 regions in the Loire Valley, isn't it? Yeah. This is Sauvignon Blanc County. But I was really surprised that I think when I did some research after this, I was like, I want to know more about Touraine. It's fascinating. Actually, more than 20% of what grows in Touraine is Gamay. This is the main area for Gamay in the Loire Valley, and they're doing really good things with it. And I suppose with lovely old climate change, whereas, Beaujolais is much further down in a much warmer region, the Loire Valley, if they're handling it well, actually, the freshness is there, but almost as well, I find slight more herbaceous, just a little bit more earthier elements than what you might get down in Beaujolais, which is much more of the fruit being front line center. I don't know if you, from probably comparing quite a few Gamays on your research to the end, agree or?
Yeah, no, I agree entirely, because again, it's that piece where we're Can Wine Co, not doing normal wine. And I think the intensity, that intensity and fruit character is so important, but it has to have that little bit of something else. And the green streak that runs through Loire Gamay and gives it that freshness to structure the bitterness, but also some of that slightly gamey maturity, even in its youth, where you have some of that game character come through. I love that hinted throughout the Gamay wine. And it's always that as a buyer where you're looking for what's the perfect fit commercially that does the crowd pleasing bit, and that's the fruit tick. But then how do we make it Can Wine Co Gamay and not run of the mill Gamay? And it's that little green streak that runs through it, gives it the freshness, but also makes it a fabulous food partner. So if you're going to have a lamb moussaka on a Wednesday evening and you want a glass of wine, what's better than a Can Wine Co Gamay?
Oh, I don't know. I think typical food from the region, like pork. I don't know if I can even pronounce it. Pork rillette. How do you actually pronounce that?
Rillette. Yeah, that was delicious.
My God. Of course, everybody listening. It's just research for me. I really had to take that very seriously. And your canned Gamay with pork rillette. Oh my God. But then also, it'd be really interesting if you're doing this research project on the Sauvignon Blanc. Is this with Lionel? Because we tasted some of his Sauvignon Blancs that were incredible. Or is this project going to be more in different places and see who wins?
So this was the lovely thing, really, is that project came out of conversations we had with Lionel. So we had no real desire to can a Sauvignon apart from knowing it was popular, because we have our Gruner that does so well, and we want to keep our releases that little bit exotic. So the Verdecco for the Waitrose, the Gruner for the Entree, what's next, a Roussanne or whatever. And we have a Viognier as well. But the passion Lionel had to ask us to take his Sauvignon, because it's his pride and joy and arguably what he's best known for in Loire, is he's a bit of a benchmark for Sauvignon Blanc because it's so good. So naturally he wants us to can his Sauvignon because he wants to share that with the world as well. I'm a little bit harder to convince because I want to do all these weird and wonderful things, but I think he was the one who drove this project. So we're very much doing it with Lionel. And if we are going to can a Sauvignon Blanc, I'd love it to be Lionel's.
Me too.
So that's a really, so it's a really nice space to be where, your winemaker is innovating for you to kind of drive new conversations. And it's not just you pushing it and going, hey, we should do this, and then kind of dragging them with you, but actually you're going together forwards as a partnership. And that's why I think we've done so well, is we have a very strong relationship with all our winemakers. So, Marcus Huber and Noel Robertson, who make our Gruner and our Vin Garnacha, are both now investors in the company. Whereas Marcus Huber, when we began working with him, was very much like, yes, you can have my juice, but don't put my name on it. And we flipped that entirely.
Wow.
I think the day we sent him the wine, he went, wow, okay, you guys are genuinely serious about this. And I think he changed his mind straight away. But, when someone first rings you up and says, can I buy bulk to can it? They're probably a bit nervous about what you're going to do with it. So
Totally. And that's because of that reputation as well, what many people expect, which is something like going on this trip with you and going to the Loire Valley and to Touraine and actually seeing what Lionel is doing with the grapes and understanding how long it stays in the winery before it's even canned. I think it is normal for many people to think that the wine going in the can is just some grapes that were just left about and no one wanted them, shove them in a tank, send them over, and it just gets filled. And you're like, oh, there you go. And this is the complete opposite, isn't it? Okay, right. My top experience, and we have to share this because for me, wine and the journey and the love of it all, it is all about these moments, the moments that you can share with people. And when we were sat around the dinner table and we took out one of Lionel's Gamay that was bottled, and then we took the canned Wineco Gamay and we poured both into a glass. And we were even tasting with a top sommelier and even he's saying the same thing, like, well, what's the difference? The difference between these two, they're not exactly the same, because of course not. They've been in different vessels, but it's incredibly hard to pick them apart. And the quality, that for me was like hands down, nothing else can be said when you can see that this is high quality juice that's the same as the bottle and actually cheaper, everyone. Cheaper in can. Insane. That was the experience for me. That was the moment.
Yeah, that was a brilliant moment, and always quite nervous when you're doing that live. But I think that's the point really, is we make the wine slightly differently with sulfur management and in tank, but the aim is basically to have the same experience as you would get with a fine bottle of wine from the can. When Henri Chapon, the sommelier, tasted it, who was famous for his Hotel de Van kickoff and being UK Sommelier of the Year and all that sort of thing. I'd never met him before. I'm giving him both wines and saying taste these next to each other is all a bit nerve-wracking. But I think the fun thing is you hear about wine tastings where you have exactly the same wine and you change the glass and you can taste the difference. So when you're having something that's been in the can for about 6 to 8 months and you put that next to the bottle that was bottled far earlier because it had resting time in the bottom, and they taste it and they go, oh, this is indistinguishable. I think that's where you can put the credit down to Lionel, to our technical manager, to our packaging people to nail all of that. And I think that's why we always have such good feedback on the wines, because they are made for wine drinkers.
Absolutely. And the reason I also mentioned the Sauvignon Blanc was because I was going to get I was just thinking about the goat's cheeses. I know I went off on a tangent and went back to Gamay, but I would love if you could get one of Lionel's Sauvignon Blancs, because then when you're having a typical French, locally sourced meal, you've got your pork rillettes and I've never tasted so many different types of goat cheese in my life and such good goat's cheese. I know that goat's cheese and Sauvignon Blanc goes together. It's one of the perfect pairings. We talk about it all the time, but my God, anybody, if you really want to understand that, you need a really good Sauvignon Blanc. Literally go to the Loire Valley and taste all of their goat's cheese. And that's also another experience for me, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, that was wonderful to taste those. I think if you're looking for something in the meantime, the Verdeco is a pretty good second best shout.
Good segue. Okay, we have to talk because remember, this is a wine educational podcast, and I learned a brand new tiny wine region within Touraine called, and we're not quite sure how we pronounce this. I think it's Welly. You think it's
almost the same, like Willy?
What?
Willy?
No, you were more like Wally.
I said Wally to start with, but I've gone down the Willy. Well,
we just need more of an accent. Now, everyone, regardless of how we're pronouncing it, two Brits here. I've never seen a spelling so weird from pronunciation. It's spelt O-I-S-L-Y. Welly, or maybe Wally. But I think anyway, this is the wine I've just happened to be holding, just looking at, was insane. Remember I said to you, You know how good a wine is when you create a description, you've said something verbally and you'll never forget it. And I remember saying to you when I tasted Lionel's Sauvignon Blanc from this tiny little region from Welly, that it's steely sunshine in a glass. And that's what it was, because the minerality was amazing and the ripeness was amazing. And this is a little sub-region that hasn't been around for that long, that is just basically the best Sauvignon Blanc of terrain that people need to know about, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I think there's only something like 10 to 15 growers. It's really small. And the difference in the appellation against the wider terrain is literally that 2-degree difference in slope, because you have all the
2 degree. There is no
yeah, because it's very flat.
There's no other slopes,
and you have basically I think it's interesting because Loire is obviously a marginal climate, especially with the changes in weather from climate change and things like that, and the amount of rain, hail, and mildew pressure they have. But that means you need a pretty decent soil, unlike most places where you try and stress the vine out on some harsh soils. So you have this clay, sand, unique soil anyway for the old vines, the deep rooted, and then for the Sauvignon vines, that water retention is actually really important for ripening, but you don't want so much of it. And that little 2-degree hint that drains away that little bit more water seems to do magic. I mean, I think Lionel was saying it flowers a week earlier, and then you have this extra, 1 to 3 weeks of ripening period basically through the year that gives you that extra level of intensity. And then I think the really nice thing about the winemaking is because they want to reflect the place, it's that, if you are going to use oak, it's very old oak and it shouldn't show up in the wine. And Lionel is doing pretty much everything without oak for his Wally wines. But there's this beautiful intensity and reflection of place from such tiny little changes that, I mean, it's the magic of viticulture and winemaking, really, is.
Totally. Micro climates, these different terroirs, these spots. I think I remember Lionel saying, actually, and you said about the sandy clay, but I think there's the top layer is more sand. And then he was saying something about the sand. Obviously, it warms up quicker. So that whole earlier flowering, earlier ripening at the beginning of season comes because not just that 2% and the draining, which has that knock-on effect anyway, but that just speeding things along. So the whole ripening season is so much longer, meaning they can ripen the fruit better. So you get far more intensity and complexity. And then because they have actually picked this specific parcel and that, so it's only specific parts that have been actually agreed, then you have to at least lease age it for 7 months or so to make sure you've got the roundness as well. And as you said, specific rules, you can't taste any oak. So everyone, this is an unoaked, effectively, unoaked Sauvignon Blanc that's round, that's complex. And if anyone wants to taste Sauvignon Blanc in a really, for me, beautiful, elegant, vibrant, really mouth-filling, but slight mineral sense, still very different from Sancerre and Puy-Formé. It doesn't have that kind of flinty nature. This is just mind-blowing and brand new for me. And I just was so excited to share that with the world. Wally, wherever you are, OISLY, go check it out.
Yeah, amazing wines. Really good.
There, everyone, there's your educational part. Bringing it back to canned wines. For everybody listening, what are the best things, in your opinion, about having wine in a can?
So for me, selfishly as a wine drinker, I think it's the choice. It's one of the best moments I think we've had at Can Wine Co. First time we did London Wine Fair as a business and exhibited, we did a dinner at the Salt Yard in London afterwards, which is lots of small plates that came out. We invited about 20, 30 people from the trade, and we had all the different cans on the table. And as the dishes came out, people were trying bits of everything and were, having a rosé, then jumping back to white and then back to the reds, and just kind of chatting and settling into this beautiful dinner that was like a casual, informal tasting menu, if you like. And the way people were keen to just give a taste of everything is what wine's all about. And that kind of experience of every little wine and food match and just trying little stuff and talking about what you thought of that one and which one was your favorite and so on. So I really like those moments about can wine where you can have something different for a meal or even just something different every day. It plays very much into that choice and experimenting. And if it was up to me and money was no object, we'd have 100 can wines by now, all showcasing different varieties, but we might take a bit of time to get there. So for me, it's that. And then as a wider business, I think there's the ability to change things for the better. So we talk about, well, the can producers, if you like, talk about the lightweight packaging, the infinite recyclability quite a lot about sustainability. But I think the real impact we have is because we're canning, the volumes we buy are quite large because you need a fast line and good volumes to go through those lines, that we actually have a lot of leverage as buyers to change more than just the packaging part, but influence upstream and basically start lobbying our winemakers or start working with winemakers from the beginning that have a holistic view for sustainability, whether that's through regen viticulture or organic when it's appropriate, or investing in their communities, water mitigation, solar power, all that sort of stuff that's so important, probably has a wider impact than what we're doing in just the can space. And that's really exciting as a business to have that influence, because Novel Wines, as much as it was exciting, was buying pallets, and you can't change minds with a pallet of wine, but you can change minds when you're buying flexi tanks and that sort of thing. So that's quite fun, I think.
I think you've already done a pretty good job of convincing everybody how good the wine is in the can, how much fun you can have with it, how you can explore with it. People already know there's some interesting varieties in there, and of course the sustainability aspect, so you can feel good whilst drinking it. But you did touch on, like, you need a fast line, you need this, like, canning wine. That's still something that I think for many people, like, what's canning wine? How do you can wine? And like, what, you put the wine in and you put the top part on? Like, what? Can we go a bit technical without going too technical?
Yeah, of course. So we started shipping everything in what effectively looks like a big bag and box. So if you imagine like a pull-up crate thing on a pallet, and you put a big bag in there that holds 1,000 litres, and you group hard ship it all the way to wherever you're canning. And we started canning things originally down in Cornwall, and then we moved things to northern Italy because we had an enologist on site, and the technical became so important that we needed a winemaker, and everything came from Europe to northern Italy, and we canned it there. And now everything goes to Norfolk, and we can it in the UK. So we can it in the market we sell it, which is where we always wanted to get to, but we weren't willing to compromise the quality. So until the quality was there for the volumes we were doing, we didn't bring it. So now it is there. We can do it here in the UK. So we bring everything now, if we can, in an ISO tank or a flex tank. So it either looks like a petrol tank or a big, even bigger bag and box. And that all comes over. The interesting thing there is the balance of shipping in bulk, where you have issues around sugar and sulfur and things anyway, and then getting it to a canning spec at the canning plant. Because obviously you want sulfur for the shipment, but you don't want sulfur when you can it. So we ship at about 20, 25 parts, and then we can at about 15. So there's a nice protection and a little drop off. And then at the canning plant, it has to be a quick line to offset micro-oxidation issues and things like that. You need the right connectors and all that sort of stuff. But what we're looking for is a quick fill, and then we spur jars with nitrogen to top it up. And then the little ring pull topper goes on basically once the nitrogen is gone in. And we use nitrogen instead of CO2 because we don't want a spritz in the can. There is sometimes a little bit of pressure that holds some nitrogen in. So when you open the can, it does the classic thing, but it dissipates very quickly because nitrogen obviously releases very fast. But it was important that if we're putting fine wine in a can, you don't have a surprise sparkling wine, because that would be terrible. So we use nitrogen because it's inert and keeps things nice and still. And if we do all that right, then we'll get the 2 years plus out of the can, which is the most important thing. And of course, the big beautiful thing about canning is the full label that you get around the can that you can brand up. And our labels look very pretty.
They are. And the Gamay, you've got and of course, Gamay is typically as well the red fruits and cherries and raspberries and maybe plums. And you've got these lovely, you can see cherries on the label. And then Gamay typically has maybe violets and floral nature. And you've got nice, there's flat. Actually, is there is that a strawberry on there?
There is, yeah.
There is a strawberry. So, I mean, it's tactile. It feels nice. It's really vibrant. So, yeah. So what is your thinking behind the branding on the labels of these cans?
Yeah. So when Simon and I were starting this, we were thinking about the label, and you'll notice it says wine on the front quite a lot. says Can Wine Co, premium wine, white wine, etc. And the reason, and even more so on our varietal range, the reason for that is we wanted it to be obvious that it was a wine for wine drinkers, because a lot of our competitors were competing in the ready-to-drink space and looking at ways they could entice people to jump from spirits and come over to the wine world. Whereas we wanted to create a single serve for wine drinkers. So we had to remind everyone that it was wine to start with. We have a front and back label, as you would on a wine bottle, in a quite nice way, I think. And then the actual colour, the vibrancy, that was inspired by a master wine called Sarah Heller, who is based in Hong Kong, who paints her tasting notes that look beautiful. So instead of writing them, she paints them. And we took that idea and spoke to Neil Tully, the master wine in Bath, where we're based, who runs a design agency called Amphora, makes a lot of the Waitrose and supermarket labels. And we said, if we give you a tasting note, can you recreate it as a artwork that we can then put on the cans that gives people that immediate impression of what the wine might taste like? So if you look at our varietal range for the on-trade that we have on our website as well, you can see the spectrum of flavors and profiles, because we have a sparkling, a light fresh white, and then a fuller bodied white, and a rosé, and then a light red and a full bodied red, and you can see what they taste like just by looking at them. And I think that was a really important part to bridge that gap with a curious wine consumer who's tasting a can for the first time. They're interested in the grape variety, and the grape variety is very much the brand on a lot of our wines, because we're showcasing the best of that grape. And then the rest of it is all that kind of reassurance that it is wine, it is done properly, it does taste great. And then hopefully they pick it up off the shelf and then see that we have done a pretty good job.
Exactly. Every one I've opened, I can say, has been absolutely well enjoyed. Now, typically, when I can, I pour it into a glass, because actually, of course, it's still a natural product that's been stuck inside a vessel, and you want to open it out, you want to get the very best. So obviously, everyone listening, just because it's in a can doesn't mean, and it's great obviously on a train, but it doesn't mean that you should just drink it from the can, because you're going to get so much more flavor if you pour into a glass. But what is your favorite? If somebody said, where is the perfect moment if they are drinking out of the can? Is this by the pool? Is this on a train? Is this by the beach? Should we be taking it hiking?
All of those things. I guess it is still a product at the moment. So when you only want one, and I think that covers such a wide range of moments. And the nice thing about the 250s is they share really well into 125 each if you just want a glass of wine with some. But I think the places I enjoy it the most, which might be different from others, because is at home, because my wife doesn't really drink wine, which comes as a surprise to a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, this is for another podcast anyway. Carry on.
And, there's plenty of times where I'll open something and drink it over the next 3 days. But I think the nice thing about having a few cans away is that choice of, well, tonight I might have a sparkling with the risotto, and I'll grab a can of our sparkling Chardonnay out and I'll see how it's tasting, or I'll have a glass of Gamay with this or whatever. I think it's that ability to elevate those ordinary moments that are, you're just having dinner after a long day at work and you fancy something interesting. It's quite nice to open up the can and taste that. So that's when I enjoy it the most, but I think it's done really well, especially for us in places like theatres, sports stadiums, all those places where typically before the wine offering has been pretty poor. And now if you're going out and spending your hard-earned money on a theatre ticket or something, you want to have a pretty good glass of wine when you go and do that. You don't want, second best. So I think if it elevates the experience, it's doing the job it's supposed to do.
And is there anything, I feel like we've already probably touched on a lot of it in terms of this is quality wine in here. This is a real winemaker. We went out to the vineyards. I picked one or two grapes. I can't say I really got involved. I took a lot of photos, but I was there for harvest. This is real beautiful wine that is tenderly, passionately cared for before it goes in the can. But is there anything to debunk that you think that we haven't mentioned already?
No, I think the challenge really is killing people to taste it and realize the quality. And the nice thing about the can trade as it's growing is everyone else is starting to recognize that there's no space to do things badly. I think the quality in bottle has got so good at every price level now that customers don't have faulty wine most of the time. Whereas if you have a can most of the time,
hit and miss, depending.
hit and
You're
miss.
being very polite, aren't you, with your potential? Well,
yeah,
you don't actually really have many competitors, though, really, because I think people have to understand that most canned wine in the UK, at least, I think we should probably let's not talk about some of those amazing premium wines in America. Then they're sitting at a much cheaper price point. So, then obviously there's, I think, would you say, and I don't know if this is true, but like using CO2 rather than nitrogen, CO2 is cheaper, but again, it's not necessarily as good. So it's maybe cutting corners, cheaper things.
Yeah, what you have a lot of the, well, not a lot of them, some of our competitors are still canning bottle specification wines, which means you have a high fault rate. And I think there's just no appetite for tolerance in the consumer tasting for a faulty wine. I think it's immediately obvious if something smells like smoky bacon or rotten eggs, and it's even worse when you've lost the fruit and it's just acidic and nasty, or if it's gone dead in the can and it's just this oxidized, bruised mess of fruit. And unfortunately, that still happens too often, and that's the case that there's just not enough volume to justify a winery, especially from the New World. If you're shipping it hundreds of thousands of miles, not that far, but thousands of miles across the sea to the UK as bulk, you're going to treat that bulk for bottle because that's where 90% of that bulk ends up going. You're not going to send a specific shipment for a can that you know would take 5-6 years to sell and only has a year shelf life. So there's definitely that market maturity piece, especially with the big brands, which is why we're quite unique that we don't have to compete with major players so much at the moment, is because they don't have the volume to do it properly. So we're in this interesting space at the top of the market where we're playing in premium. And I think the really nice point of that is you have a lot of people who heard about cans, maybe gave one of the cheaper brands a go for a year in their venue to kind of bring the format to consumers. And we have a particularly large competitor who I won't name who's opened a lot of doors for us, because what happens is a year later, those customers have fed back, we love the idea, but we don't like the wine. And then that's when it's time to trade up, offer a genuine experience. They can still hit their margin, but they can offer something so much better. And once people have tasted that quality, they come back and they buy it again and again, because we have to realize that if you're going out and buying a glass of wine, it's a luxury moment. You want that moment to be enjoyable. You're not spending your money just for the sake of it. You want it to lubricate a social experience or be the moment in itself, or go nicely with your dinner or whatever it might be, or even taste relatively palatable when it warms up in your hand. You want that quality to be there. And I think it's a given in bottle. So you can't really not make it a given in can. And I think that's why we've done very well.
And that's why you guys are leading it. And that's just a fact. Now, just as we start slowly closing off this episode, what's been the number one moment? Like, where have you seen someone drinking one of your canned wines, and gone, oh my God?
I mean, it has to be Wimbledon, right? I can't really get away with saying anything else. But when you see people on the telly sipping a can of Grenache Rosé at Wimbledon, I mean, that's a very special moment, because that's, an emblematic event of the year, and then your can's popping up in someone's hand who's laughing and clearly enjoying it and watching the tennis. So that's pretty epic. I think every time I see someone with a can of wine, even if we're there sampling, activating and distributing it, it's a happy moment. And when the winemakers drink it and they love it, I think that's a testament to feeling like we've done the right thing and doing it well.
Beautiful. And what's the future for Canned Wine Co? Any exciting developments, or do we all just have to wait?
Well, the biggest new news is Waitrose, obviously, where we have the Verdeco and the Gamay. But I think, watch this space. I have a long list of wines that I would love to put into a can. And the buyer part of me is just waiting for the opportunity. So the passion part is certainly there.
The more we drink, the more varieties we get, right?
Exactly, yeah. So keep trying the wines and I'll be introducing more and more.
Fab. So obviously for everybody in the UK, there's obviously the Verdeco and there's the Gamay through Waitrose and Ocado. Any of these wines, there are a few places exported. You're selling these wines in Greece, aren't you?
Yeah, so we sell them to Greece and Malta as well. They're in the south of France in the Alps. So if you go skiing, you'll see some of our cans there. And then we have some very fun conversations going on in a couple of new markets as well. So you'll see them there. I'm going to try and get on a trip to support one of them because there's loads of lovely beaches and sunshine. So I'm very excited. But I'll share those soon. But yeah, so new markets, which is very exciting. And then if people want to buy the full range, so we have our National Gallery limited edition cans, which are co-branded with Vincent van Gogh and those sort of things, which are beautiful. We've got our varietal range that is sold in up and down the country in venues with our Gruner, Garnacho, Rosé, St. Laurent, etc. And then, of course, the Verdeco and the Gamay and the Heritage range. One that everyone should try, because I want feedback on it, is our Sparkling Chardonnay, which is my Charmat method viz that's transferred in tank. It has 9 months of lees-aged, pressurized tank aging before it gets canned. Bone dry, 100% Chardonnay. That's iteration number 2. And then the third iteration, I'm going to put a little bit of barrel fermented Chardonnay in to give it some toastiness. And I've said several times it's my future champagne in can one day.
Okay. Well, I love the current iteration, but I'm excited then about the third. Can anybody buy these? Can they buy any of these direct from your website?
Yes, yeah. So they're all available on camwine.co.
And I will put the link in the show notes. Thank you very much, Ben. I'd love to stay and chat, but some of your wines, your canned wines, they're just looking at me, and I guess they just want to be drunk. So we won't tell everybody that we're recording in the morning. I'm just going to pretend I need to go off and drink them because they're delicious.
Well, enjoy. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Perfect. Speak to you soon. Okay.
Bye.
Take care. I hope that conversation has shown just how impressive Canned Wine Co. wines truly are, and that everyone's as excited as I am to give them a try and experience quality wine in a whole new way. Now, next week, I am chatting with Vince Anter, who is the founder and the host of V is for Vino, the wine show. And it's a perfect lead on from this episode as we are talking about the Loire Valley and his time in this region. But before you leave, a wine quote from Kevin Zralny, an American wine educator, who said, "Wine should not be judged in ounces and vintages alone, but by the journey it took to arrive and the respect with which we enjoy it." Well, I think this quote captures the spirit of appreciating wine's origin and story, which sustainable and portable formats help share more widely. And whilst we are sharing, please do share this podcast with your wine-loving friends. Leave a rating on Spotify or some stars and a super quick review on Apple. It will help massively to make the podcast more discoverable. Now, wishing you all a wonderful week ahead, filled with moments to savor and a reminder to care for nature's gift that sustained us all. Until next week, wine friends, cheers to you.